Let's talk about limited reagent, but let's first use a recipe to make cheese sandwich. Now, cheese sandwich, I'm assuming most of you all have made it, and the recipe is this. You need 2 bread, 1 cheese to make 1 cheese sandwich. Pretty simple, right? Imagine one day your mom says, hey, make me as many cheese sandwich as you can with the ingredients that you have in your fridge. And as you search the fridge, you see you have 4 bread, 4 cheese, and from that, how many cheese sandwich can you make? And maybe you guys are quick and say, hey, I can make 2 cheese sandwiches, right? And from that, you could also know how many X's you have. And so let's just try to work it out together. And we could see that for every sandwich, 1 cheese sandwich, I need 2 bread and 1 cheese. And in order for me to make 2 cheese sandwiches, I need 2 bread and 1 cheese. And so the maximum cheese sandwich I could have is 2. Why? Because I only had 4 bread to begin with, and I have 2 cheese. And so from my original ingredients from the refrigerator, the maximum I can make is 2 cheese sandwiches, and the excess I've left over is 2 cheese. Okay? Now let's just say hypothetically some of you hate cooking or you just hate cheese sandwich in general. And so we can use more ratio to see how many cheese sandwiches we can make. And so I just rewrote the equation right here. And we have 4 bread and 4 cheese. And that's what we had in the fridge. And this time we're going to use the more ratio to see how much product we can make. And so we use more ratio of 4 bread. And from this equation, we need 2 bread to make 1 cheese sandwich. And so that's why we use this specific ratio of 1 cheese sandwich over 2 bread. And so from 4 bread, we make 2 cheese sandwiches. And also, in order to find the limited reactant, we also have to do more ratio for each reactant. And so now that we did bread, let's do cheese. And so we're given 4 cheese. And then we use the same more ratio, not the same, but the ratio from the equation. So 1-to-1 ratio. And so we have 1 cheese sandwich to 1 cheese. And therefore we make 4 cheese sandwiches. Now let's pause here. Which is it? Which is the limited reactant? Is it the 4 bread or is it 4 cheese? And the shortcut is we always use the smallest product. But let's just say hypothetically you want to argue that, Jay, this has to be 4 cheese. Okay. And so in order for me to make 4 cheese sandwiches, how many bread do I need? I need 8 bread. But do I have 8 bread? No, because I already found 4 bread in my fridge. And so this is super important that when you want to find a limited reactant, you use the appropriate mole ratio, but you always choose the smallest product. You use the mole ratio of each reactant, but then you always choose the smallest product and eliminate the largest product that you have. Okay? And now once you find the limited reactant or reagent, use that same ratio to find the excess. So we realized the limited reagent was 4 bread, and we used the more ratio. So every 2 bread, we need 1 cheese. And I use the ratio right here. And so when I use 4 bread, I use 2 cheese. Now, what does this 2 cheese mean? What this means is in order for me to make 2 cheese sandwiches, I need to use 2 cheese. And so when your mom asks you, oh, how much cheese is left over? You just do the subtraction of the original 4 cheese that you had in the fridge, and then you subtract the 2 cheese that you used to make the 2 sandwiches. Okay? And so I think the 4 bread, 4 cheese is kind of easy to think in your head. But for our next problem, what if hypothetically you got super rich and in your big fridge you had 50 bread and 50 cheese, and your mom says, go make as many cheese sandwiches as you can. And obviously this one there's a lot of math in your head, so you could use mole ratio. And I'm going to speed it up this time, where we have 50 bread, and we use the same ratio of 1 cheese sandwich to 2 bread. And so if I use 50 bread, I make 25 cheese sandwiches. And now if I use 50 cheese, I have 50 cheese sandwiches. And like I asked before, which is it? Which is the limited reagent? It's 25, right? Because you make the smallest product. And the reason why this doesn't make sense is if I want to make 50 cheese sandwich, I need 100 bread, but I don't have 100 bread. And therefore, this is not the limited reagent. And then how do I find the excess? So we use the same limited reagent. Now that we know the 50 bread is the limited reagent, we use a mole ratio between the two different reactants, which is 1 cheese to 2 bread. And so once you do the calculation, we used 25 cheese. And in order to find the excess amount of cheese, you just do initial, which you have 50 cheese in your fridge, and then you use 25 cheese to make 25 cheese sandwich. And therefore, your excess is 25. Now, let's do a last problem, but then let's make it a little bit more chemistry-ish, okay? And so this is a problem. You are given 12 grams of hydrogen and 12 grams of oxygen. Find the limited reagent, product, and excess. For those who want to try on your own, just pause the video. And for those who want to continue, let's start. Now, I took an extra step, but what I should have done is label everything first. So I should have put hydrogen first, oxygen, and remember, hydrogen and oxygen are diatomic, and we make water. Now, once you put this equation, it has to be balanced. And so we have 4 hydrogens on the left, and then 4 hydrogens on the right, 2 oxygen on the left, 2 oxygen on the right. And so make sure you don't take that step, because actually this step is actually very important, because if you don't balance the equation correctly, your mole ratios are all going to be off and your answer will be wrong. Now, after you balance the equation, the next step is to find moles of each reactant. And the way we do that is to use molar mass, which is just a fancy word of saying 1 mole of how much grams per mole. And so we're given 12 grams of hydrogen, and then we use mole ratio. For every 1 mole of hydrogen, there's 2 grams. And so in 12 grams of hydrogen, we have 6 moles of hydrogen. And from 12 grams of oxygen, using molar mass, we get 0.375 moles of oxygen. Okay, now that we know the moles, let's do the limited reagent. And so we use the mole ratio of 6 mole of hydrogen. And from that reactant, how many product can we make? 2 to 2. And so if I react 6 moles of hydrogen, I make 6 moles of water. I should put that down. And then from 0.375 moles of oxygen, how much product I make? 0.75. And now you're in this dilemma again, which is the limited reagent? And the limited reagent is water, because you want to make the less product. Now, hypothetically, if the problem says, oh, how much product did you make in grams? What would you do, right? And the way you do that is convert grams to moles. And so 1 mole of water is 18 grams of water. I don't have a calculator with me, but you guys could do the math. And so that's how you find the grams, okay? And lastly, they ask, find the excess. And in order to find the excess, we use the limited reagent, which was 0.375 moles of oxygen. And we use the mole ratio of the 2 different reactants, and we get 0.75 moles of H2. And what this means is, once again, is if I use 0.375 moles of oxygen, I also use 0.75 moles of hydrogen. And so in order to find the excess, all I do is subtraction of the initial moles of hydrogen minus how much mole I used. So just to recap, whenever you see a problem with limited reagent, the first step is always find moles. The second step is use mole ratio to find smaller or lesser product. And the last step is to find the excess, mole ratio, and then subtract initial minus what you use. So that is just a quick overview of limited reagent. If you have any problems,